watch me fly. Put on your cape.
All right, welcome everyone to Warrior Woman in Business podcast episode 62. It's going to be a fabulous podcast. Actually, I know a lot of people have been reaching out to me for this guest, which is fantastic. Everybody's really excited. So before I get into the podcast today, I'm going to just give it, for those of you that are new to Warrior Women in Business or may have missed the last, I don't know, 4 amazing episodes with very thankful for my guests. I wanted to introduce myself, Jasmine Sandler, and Warrior Women in Business. Warrior Women in Business is a subset, a division of my main company called JS Media, which has been serving female-led businesses, entrepreneurs, and small to mid-sized businesses in digital marketing and branding since 2006. I started Warrior Women in Business about 10 years ago because I saw a real need to bring women like the woman I'm really lucky to have on today and all the fabulous guests I've had, not only in my podcast, but my conference and event series, to female entrepreneurs and women that are very career driven. So they can share their stories, their advice, and act as mentors and role models for women, and that so we can collaborate and not compete. And that's really the mission of Warrior Women in Business. Just to note some things that have happened in the last few weeks for those of you that have missed. So I want to actually go back a few episodes to Phyllis Wilson, who is the president of the Women's Military Memorial in Arlington, Virginia. I'm actually physically going down there in the next couple of weeks. She was a fantastic podcast guest, episode 58. And she talked about, which I didn't know anything about, that there are over 3 million women that have served in the U.S. military since the Revolutionary War. And so the memorial is really cool. I'm very honestly excited to go to kind of like see their stories, hear their stories. They have like these interactive exhibits and things. And we do, as everybody knows, we do a lot in the world of coming up with cool characters. So we made a Warrior Women in the Military design, t-shirt, tank top, and $1 of every sale of every t-shirt is going back to the military, the women's military, to help them to tell these stories. So I thought that was a really great thing that just happened. Another podcast guest of note that's important is Robin Newman. She is the co-producer of the Broadway show Tommy and countless other Broadway shows. And as you all know, the folks that know Warrior Women, is we also have an entire arts and entertainment division. So I'm really excited about supporting the arts and supporting Broadway. Since COVID, Broadway's kind of fallen on its knees a little bit. So I'm very involved right now in working with women on Broadway, and we're doing some neat things, including some upcoming events. So keep your ears and your eyes open for those things coming from Warrior Women. All that being said, I am like beyond ecstatic and not being cliche to have today's guest on for a number of fronts. One is I'm a hockey player my entire life and used to work for the NHL. So I'm a huge fan, is an understatement. I'm very, very interested in seeing what's happening at the NHL from the growth of embracement of women, obviously with the launch of, in January of the PWHL and multicultural audiences. And so I am really excited to introduce Kim Davis as podcast guest episode 62. So Kim, if you want to say hello.
Oh, thank you. And I'm delighted to be here, Jasmine, and honored and humbled to be your guest.
Yes. Well, I really appreciate you being on. I have a plethora of questions. So first, I just want to give a short bio. I got to say, when I looked up Kim and I reached out to her and I bothered her as I always do. And that's okay. We have to be persistent in business as women.
That's right.
Yeah, I looked at her profile and I said to someone, oh my God, I thought that I've had the most amazing guests on. I've had the CMO of Guitar Center. I've had the president of Marvel Comics. And I looked at her profile and I was so beyond flattered. Started with Springboard, which we're going to get into today a little bit. But let me talk to you to share a little bit about Kim's background, just a brief on what she's doing today and why this podcast is so important. So she is currently the Senior Executive Vice President of Social Impact Growth Initiatives and Legislative Affairs at the National Hockey League, the premier professional ice hockey league in the world. In this capacity, Kim leads a role reporting to Gary Bettman, Commissioner, for those of you that don't know who he is, to attract, develop, and retain fans with a specific focus on multicultural audiences through culture, youth participation, and social impact initiatives. And that's a lot, I think. And there's probably a lot that we're going to share there. So I want to start with talking a little bit about your background, Kim, and then getting into today. So first of all, again, thanks for taking the time out. I can't even imagine how busy you are leading that for the NHL. So, Warrior Women is all about sharing your wisdom and your insights. And you have such an impressive history that I feel that you've probably leveraged in this role, right? Of not only what I read, which is supporting women in business, which I love, obviously, but also in leading important philanthropic community and social impact programs ranging from JP Morgan to the NHL and countless others. So could you kind of talk about, like, weave for us, share a bit about your background that's relevant, and how did you choose this path, and what in those former experiences do you think has helped you to gain and sustain these leadership positions?
Oh my God. Well, that's good. That one question is going to take us through the entire hour. It is quite a journey, and it is absolutely not linear. So again, let me start by saying thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. So we will have to go back 40 years because I've been in business for 40 years. I've basically been in three major industries: financial services, consulting, and now sports and entertainment. And when people hear that, they often say, my goodness, those are so different. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the first lessons that I learned many years ago and was taught to me by one of my first sponsors is that what we perceive as being different is usually the thing that is most common. And what I would say about that is it's been easy to understand the differences in these industries. What I think I have brought to each one of these industries is a set of skills and competencies that are quite transferable. And as women, we often think that we have to be so technical in certain areas in order for people to see our competence. And we often overlook those leadership traits that we have naturally that actually are more important than those technical competencies that we feel we need. So I started my career in financial services. I often talk about the 3 Ps: preparation, passion, and purpose. And what I say to young women is that it is so important to be focused early in your career on preparation, to make sure that you anchor yourself in a competency that you can always go back on, that helps you to understand how to be a good project manager and how to be a good analytical skills. That doesn't mean you have to be an accountant to have good analytical skills, but you should have proficiency in areas that help you understand the different kinds of businesses that you might touch. And proficiency doesn't mean that you have to be the expert. Again, so these are all the little things that I have learned as my career has progressed. Financial services, 20 plus years with JP Morgan, during a period of time in financial services when all banks were going through major acquisitions and mergers. And so while I was there for 20 years, I probably had 15 different jobs. And what that taught me was resiliency, right? Understanding that knowing how to pivot and deal with ambiguity is actually such an important skill set to have as you think about the mastery of your craft in the world of work. I don't think I understood just how important that was until I got deeper into my career, and I realized that lack of fear or as my grandmother used to say, that fearlessness that I
Yeah.
had in attacking new challenges where I didn't necessarily have all the skills or all the answers, but I felt confident enough to be able to tackle it and to, you know, and to learn as I was going, came from those experiences of dealing with ambiguity and dealing with the unknown. So by the time I came through 15 different assignments, from staff roles to P&L roles to the head of the foundation at JP Morgan, I really felt confident enough to be able to tackle anything. Now, an important thing about confidence is that we can't confuse confidence with cockiness, right? Confidence comes with a significant amount of humility.
That's right.
Being humble enough to know when you don't know, being humble enough to know when you need to be a follower versus a leader, the fellowship of servant leadership. And those are the things that I think describe confidence. And so by the time the opportunity came for me to pivot into the world of consulting, and again, you said, how did you find these roles? In many cases, these roles found me. And it was through establishing throughout my career really strong networks. And I can't promote that idea enough on this podcast, particularly for women. We have to nurture our networks. And that doesn't mean that doesn't mean not focusing on your craft. It means that you have to think of your career as like Me Inc., like a marketing product. And that part of your career, I believe you have to constantly nurture. Every day I wake up and I say, what do I need to do in order to nurture my own career? I say that today still as a 65-year-old. I don't feel like a 65-year-old. I feel like a 25-year-old as it relates to nurturing my career and making sure that I take care of the Me Inc., which I think is so important.
Isn't that the truth? It's like, you gave me a vision of when I started in my career on Madison Avenue. I used to read the Wall Street Journal, only the advertising.
Yes.
I don't have a finance background. And I used to think, how do I develop a network? And I still, to this day, kind of have the same approach. It's interesting that I agree with you. I don't think you can climb those steps unless that's your mindset. I love that you brought that up. So thank you.
That is absolutely a mindset issue for sure. And I'm so glad you agree, because obviously your success and the various businesses that you built as an entrepreneur comes from those networks that you've created over the course of your career journey. So as a consultant, it was nice to have had so much experience in-house, because I could relate to the issues and the problems that CEOs were having, because they were issues that I had faced running businesses for over 30 years. And I think that's what made me attractive as a leader on so many of the projects that I led, was that I wasn't just creating a deck that they would, put in a drawer later. And I say that because I worked with many consultants myself when I was on the business side. And many years later, those decks are in the drawer. But I would be thinking about it from the perspective of, what are the impediments that are standing in the way of them being able to execute these things, right? Do they have the right organizational construct? Do they have the right people? Is the fit right? And those are things typically as a consultant, you only know if you've actually walked in those shoes.
That's right.
I ended up at the NHL because of the consulting relationship. Again, there's that word again, relationship, that we had with the NHL, and I met the commissioner. And I was leading that assignment on behalf of the consulting firm that I worked for.
Oh, I see.
And that's how I met Gary Bettman. And that's how he and I built a relationship. And ultimately, Gary said, why don't you come and help us think about what the next 100 years of the NHL needs to look like?
Wow.
And he allowed me to
That's
co-create this position alongside him. That was a dream come true. To be able to,
and that's innovation, you know.
That's real innovation. That's innovation in action, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's innovation in action. He and I developed the job description. He and I developed the pieces of the job that would come from other parts of the organization, and the new pieces of the job that we needed to think about as we thought about the future of the NHL. Mm-hmm. And 6 years later, I am there. I am still as excited today as I was 6 years ago when I joined the NHL. And I'm just happy to be able to talk about the work that we are doing to make sure that our sport continues to be relevant and is poised for the future.
Wonderful. I'm going to get into the NHL more, but I want to just, if you don't mind, touch upon what your grandmother said and what you were talking about, please. I love my grandmother too, God rest her soul. So this fearless leader, right? Now you were at Springboard, but I know about Springboard. It's an amazing organization, right? So, you know, you've done a lot of work supporting women, and I'm sure that you've worked with female leaders, especially to me, Springboard just stands out. Are there any, for my audience, right, who are aspiring leaders? A lot of them actually, Kim, are executives that are now venturing into entrepreneurial ventures. So
yes.
I have both sides, but what characteristics can you talk about or point to in the work of supporting women, particularly female leaders? Because I think you've worked on both sides. Like you said, you run companies within organizations as well. So I'm just wondering if there are any characteristics you can talk about, or maybe even a story about fearlessness in women and how they can climb, because you can't get to the proverbial top without being fearless in so many situations. And I'm just wondering, in your own experience, what does that look like? A story, or maybe some tips for my audience?
So let me start with a story, and it's a story about my grandmother,
Okay.
Dr. Rose Butler Brown, who was the first Black female to get her PhD from Harvard in 1939. And she was one of only 2 women in the PhD program. And she would tell me about the other woman who refused to study with her.
Oh.
And what was so encouraging to me as a young woman listening to her story was that she did not use that experience. She was not bitter by that experience. She used that to catapult her into service for women, service for children, so that that experience would not happen for the next generation. Mm-hmm. And I appreciated that, because I think that's one of the most important attributes of leadership generally, and for sure leadership for women, is that sense of, so what, now what? Right?
Yeah.
Not
That's a hard lesson to learn. I'm glad you're bringing this one up.
It's such a hard lesson, and it is easy when you've had a souring experience to let that impact what your leadership stance is in the future. And she always said to me, being fearless doesn't mean that you aren't scared. It means that despite your fear, you go beyond, you push yourself forward, that you set the example for others to follow. And that is really what I grew up under. I grew up under models of strong women, from my paternal grandmother to my maternal grandmother, my mother. And that, I think, we can never underestimate. It doesn't mean that you can't be a strong female leader if you don't have that, but something about that journey of strength really gives you a sense of freedom to be able to be your authentic self. And I think that would be one of the things that has been most enduring in my career, is the freedom that I've always felt even when I didn't even know what I didn't know. But I always had this sense of freedom to be my authentic self.
It's interesting. You're like talking about being comfortable in the uncomfortable.
Yes,
Which
yes.
is
And I
very
say that all the
interesting.
time. Yeah.
What's that? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. What did you
No,
say?
I was going to say, I say that all the time. Getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. That really is that space and that place of fearlessness, is again not trying to pretend that we aren't scared, because there are many moments even today where I am very, very uncomfortable and I'm scared, but being able to push yourself beyond that place, I think, is such an important leadership trait and attribute, particularly for women.
Yeah. Oh, I couldn't agree with you more on that. It really, really is. So let's talk about, it's like I want to read a book about your grandmother now, but and kudos to her, really. I mean, it's a big deal. So, all right, let's talk about my favorite subject, which is hockey. As a hockey player my whole life,
I can't believe that.
generally
Where
on
did you
men's
play?
teams. What's that?
Where did you play?
Oh, I still play. Anytime
Wow.
you want to break out for lunch.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So no, I started playing late, actually. I was in grad school in Miami, and it's ridiculous. And I've always worked. So I worked for the Panthers.
Okay.
And then I started playing then, joined a men's team. I always played roller hockey, but never ice. And I've just been playing ever since. Tournaments. I was a president of a hockey association. I love hockey. So yeah, I play on women's traveling teams.
That's fantastic.
But I like both. I mean, in anything, in hockey or in life, especially in hockey, the higher talent on the ice, right? For me has always been, and I think other hockey players will agree, is what raises your bar. So
Yes.
I've been the opposite. I've always been the woman who, when people said, well, why don't you just play with girls? I would say, okay, well, how good are they? And I'd encourage them to get better, right? To make a level playing field on the ice. So
Yes.
let's
Yes.
talk about hockey for a second.
Okay.
Okay. So there's a lot that goes into the sport and the fan development. I want to understand more about your role specifically. You talked about, I love that you gave the background on how you met Gary and then you created a position. So that's important for all my hockey friends that are listening today, that it's innovative. And that's very important. And I think on our side, the consumers of the NHL, we need to embrace that. We really
Yes.
do. We really need to embrace it, and we really need to promote it, because I think if we, the consumers, aren't promoting what you're doing, that innovation could stop. Because I wanted to talk about the fact that it's predominantly, as we know, more of a male, white dominated sport. I mean, traditionally, and you're coming in, breaking boundaries, which I'm really excited about, and focusing on multicultural audience, which is like, hello, I mean, here's the growing population, right? So talk a little bit about what that means in your specific role. What do you do in your specific role? Like, what are some of the programs? You said 6 years. So can you talk about what you've done, maybe some markers or some research, and then where you're going and how we can help?
Yes. So I would begin by saying, whenever people talk about hockey, the first narrative that they describe is this narrative of it being a white male sport. So one of the first things I wanted to do was to understand the origins of that, and actually to understand whether or not that was entirely true. So as we got under the data and the research 6 years ago, what we understood were the following. Number one, at that time, over 15% of the current hockey fan base were multicultural. And if you ask people back then, they would say, oh, it's probably 1%. So that was sort of part of myth busting from the very beginning. Today, by the way, the multicultural fan base is 25%.
Oh, that's incredible. Okay.
The second part of the myth busting was women like hockey, but they really aren't big consumers of hockey. Well, guess what? 4 out of 10 avid hockey fans are women. 40% of the current NHL fan base are women. Okay. Now, saying those two things out loud, 25% multicultural and 40% female, is a big deal, because that didn't just happen when I came. That has been evolving over time. And so it helps us to recraft the narrative around who consumes hockey and where is hockey going in the future.
Yes.
Phase 2 of my early work was to look at demographic shifts across North America and to see, based on the way the shifts were going to be playing out over the next 10 to 20 years, how does hockey fare in that demographic profile? I partnered with the Brookings Institute, an old friend, Dr. Bill Fry, who has done all of the demographic longitudinal work at Brookings. And I had him take our then 31 clubs and overlay those markets with the demographic shifts that he's been watching over the past 25 years. And what we learned, and that was in 2018, what we learned was that in 23 of our then 31 markets, this idea of minority was a misnomer. For millennials and Gen Zs, they were already in the majority in those markets.
Yep.
And so, armed with that data and those facts and that new sort of context for our sport, I went around and started meeting with presidents and CMOs in all the clubs and started sharing with them that if they were going to get their fair share of fandom of the future, if we were going to not just survive but thrive, we were going to have to really create and embrace where the sport was going. And that's how our movement began.
Yeah, makes sense.
And so some people want to minimize and discount this work as diversity work.
Right.
And if it makes them comfortable, that's fine. I've never had diversity in the titles of any jobs that I've ever had in 40
Good for
years.
you.
Somehow or another, people want to reduce.
Good, good for you, I have to say that.
And look, I have to also say that anytime you see a woman or a person of color in a senior role, somehow or another, it makes other people feel comfortable to say that they're doing diversity work.
Right.
And that's not taking anything away from diversity work, understand. No. But this is bigger than diversity work. This is how are we going to succeed and build our future revenue base? How are we going to diversify our portfolio, our economic portfolio over the next 10, 20, 30 years? And that is the narrative that we have used to build the future. Now, you asked the question, what are the specific ways in which we're doing that?
Yeah, just we want to understand some of the programs.
Yes. So there's sort of 3 verticals, if you will, of work. The first is youth participation. We know that if a child gets involved with hockey early on, there's a 3 times chance that their family and themselves will be fans of our sport. So youth participation is a critically important element of building future fandom in our sport. 10 years ago, the NHL, and again, because you played hockey, sometimes the humility of our sport gets in the way of our being able to promote just how much progress we've made. So part of what I've been able to try to do over these 6 years is to get us to talk more and to brag a little bit more. Like, bragging isn't negative, right? As long as you continue to be humble, you can brag and you can be humble at the same time.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, I like that. 10 years ago, we developed a initiative in partnership with the Players Association called the Industry Growth Fund to put significant millions of dollars in communities to help get new audiences, new kids, new families involved in our sport. And since that time, we've touched over 1 million kids in our Learn to Play, our Learn to Skate programs across North America. That's something to celebrate. We are now in our 10th year of that programming, and we put over $150 million in communities to help families who can't afford.
And I got to tell you how much that works, because I also work for the Lightning. I just wanted to bring this up with the Tampa Bay Lightning. When they first came into the league, right? They, they're like an extension team.
Right.
Those of us that are classic, from Boston and New York are like, oh, it's an extension team. It's no big deal. But what I saw was, because I worked the All-Star game, what I saw was this awesome community development. And I think it helped the club, obviously Stanley Cup winners. I mean, the Lightning are amazing. It's ridiculous. The Lightning, right?
That's right.
Right. But I saw, like, to your point about the female fans, I saw this real rise over the years that I was there anyway, in this female fandom. And these are a lot of moms that have kids, right?
That's right.
And then the kids start playing. And then the club can not only stay in existence, right? But then to the Lightning, then they have money for new salaries. So I think, I just wanted to stop and say, like, I witnessed that. And I think the programs, they really work.
The programs work. And particularly in Sunbelt markets or Western Southern markets, California, Las Vegas, Texas, Florida, all of these markets where we know there are not enough sheets of ice across the state. For example, Las Vegas, when they came online, there are only 2 sheets of ice in the entire state.
That's they're the most amazing story in my mind. Like, I cannot believe
the most amazing story
came.
and they engage their fan base in many ways through ball and street hockey.
Yep.
Right. And so it is absolutely a testament to what I see as the 5 key attributes of the fan today and the fan of the future. And that is youthful, female, multicultural, tech savvy, and purpose driven. Those are the key attributes that are going to take us into the future. And so to be able to put programming in place, we just developed the last couple of years a new twist on street hockey called NHL Street, where we've combined food and entertainment and fashion and music with ball and street hockey in a way that it can either be an on-ramp to ice or it could be in its own ramp. And to do that in urban places or rural places where there's no ice, to make it easier for families, because we know that ice hockey is a big commitment, time commitment. Families are changing, so we have to adapt and innovate, to your point, around the ways in which people consume and the way people live today. And that's the way we are thinking about the sport from a participation point of view.
I love it. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Keep going.
The only other thing I want to talk about was how purpose-driven the youth segment is, and how they align with brands that are thinking about ways in which they can contribute to society. And so we have been very focused and intentional on making sure that we use the economic resources of the NHL to help build stronger, more vibrant communities. We know in so many of our markets, the NHL is one of the largest employers, right? And so we have to talk about the economic value add that we're adding, and how we're giving back to the communities through the foundations and through our community relations and all of the things that have really helped to catapult many of the clubs that you just described, like the Lightning, like the Golden Knights, like San Jose, because their community involvement has been so robust. It has helped to build their brand among consumers across the board.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Definitely. You bring up San Jose. It's just another like Cinderella story out there, and I just love to see it. And it's always interesting as a hockey player, a fan, somebody used to work for the NHL. We'll see a new team and we'll kind of talk and we'll say, Do you think this team's going to develop? And then just, I mean, the Vegas nights, it just gives me goosebumps, like how quick and the experience that they built and the fans, and forget about the talent, you know, so it's just amazing. Okay, so I have a question about female leaders in the NHL and female leadership in general. A lot of my guests talk about the importance of female leaders supporting each other. None of them from a hockey in the NHL, or primarily none in sports. So I'm just wondering, in this, at the higher levels in the sports industry, can you share a little bit about either any organizations you can point to or resources for women connecting with other female leaders, connecting with other female leaders in the sports industry?
I've seen a tremendous improvement in collaborative leadership with women across the sports industry in the 6 short years that I've been here. In many ways, I would say a number of organizations have really contributed to that. The one that I think has made the greatest contribution is WISE, Women in Sports and Entertainment. And Kathy Francis, if you haven't had her on, you should have her on, because she also has an amazing career portfolio. Kathy and I knew each other 30 years ago in Hartford, Connecticut, 40 years ago, frankly, at Aetna Life and Casualty. But she has—
I was going to say Aetna.
Yeah, she worked—
like the pillar of Hartford.
That's right, particularly back in the 80s.
Yeah.
But Kathy has been working with all the major sports leagues to create leadership programming for women in sports, and I tell you, it has really paid off. Sports is a very patriarchal and masculine leaning industry, but there are amazing stories of women that are excelling, and I've seen an amazing catapulting of women in the NHL just in the 6 years that I've been there. The governors, the owners that are sitting around the board table today have increased significantly in the 6 years that I've been there. The number of female—
That's a big shift, I gotta say.
It is such a huge shift, Jasmine.
That seems like I remember hearing about one of the female executives at one of the clubs, and I was thinking, wow, it's great. Like you traditionally we haven't seen that. So
we've got female presidents in Montreal, in Chicago, in Philadelphia. I mean, we have such amazing leadership, and many like myself have come from other industries. And so I think it's important. It goes back to my earlier point about transferability of skills.
Yes.
And we should not be afraid to go to other industries, because it's the skill set and the experience that we bring. And sometimes that diversity of thought around the table allows people to think very differently, because you're bringing a perspective that otherwise had not been there. So diversity from that perspective comes in so many different shapes and sizes. And I think that's so critically important to building high performing teams, for sure.
Yeah, well, as an entrepreneur, I can tell you that getting people involved to think outside the box or come from different angles, even some of the things that you've talked to me about today, it's in the back of my mind that, you know, you're coming from a different perspective with a different background. And so we can learn from each other. We have to be open.
Yes.
You know, let's talk a little bit about what gets you the most excited. Like, I know it is really exciting what you're doing at the NHL. You know, now that I actually have time to talk to you and think about the progress that I've seen from an outsider perspective, right? You know, what's inspiring you now and give you kind of like the most hope going forward for other female leaders? It can be inside the sport industry, outside the sport industry, it could be in finance.
Yeah.
You know, just women in general, female leadership, what's exciting you? What are some of the things? I mean, I love that you brought up WISE. I've been to a few of their events, but no, I don't know her and don't really know too much about it. Where you think that, you know, women in leadership are on the rise. What's exciting you there?
I can't tell you how encouraged and excited I am having exposure to this young next generation of leaders. And I'll give you a very concrete example. A couple of weeks ago, I had a lunch and learn session with the summer interns that were at the NHL. 75% of the interns were women, number one. That was exciting enough, right?
That's pretty exciting.
Okay.
Mhm.
But sitting in that room and listening to the questions that they were asking me made me feel like, man, the future is going to be safe in these young people's hands more broadly, but specifically the women who had a sense already of fearlessness and a willingness to be vulnerable. Let's talk about vulnerability for a minute, because this, again, you asked earlier about what are some of the important traits of leadership. And I think one of the most important traits of leadership, and it's something that I think women can teach men to do more of as women leaders, is to show vulnerability. Vulnerability builds trust. And, you know, I often talk about two forms of trust: earned trust and granted trust. Granted trust comes with positionality, right? And people sort of grant that because of who you are and where you are. But earned trust comes from people really believing in you and wanting to follow you. And that comes from them seeing you being vulnerable and them then feeling comfortable enough to know that they can lean into your leadership style because you have shown that sense of vulnerability. I saw this summer these young women who were willing to be vulnerable, and I said to them, this is going to be one of the most enduring traits of your future leadership. Don't lose it. And then I implored the young men in the room to please develop it and don't be afraid to show your vulnerability, because that builds a level of trust that you just cannot get through granted trust. So what gets me excited is helping to nurture and usher in the next generation of leaders. At this point in my career, I've done and proven all that I need to prove. For me, it's about helping to usher in the next generation of leaders. And that's what gets me up every day. And that's what keeps me excited about the work that I do, both at the NHL and in the community at large.
I love that. Also, it's interesting when you talked about, first of all, I love that, would you say 75% are girls?
Yes.
That's really incredible.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, I mean, I coach girls hockey. I think they're just so cool. But what I was going to say is, what's interesting that you talked about is I do see a shift in the way the trust piece, we never have talked about on this podcast. So I'm seeing a little bit of shift of how employers are trusted. You know, you have everything is public, right? You have Glassdoor, everything is public. And I do executive branding every day for executives. There's this public sense. And I love that you talk about vulnerability. And I'm also wondering about how leaders themselves today need to maybe make those shifts to be more, as you mentioned, attractive for engagement, you know, because it seems to me like that shut down private world, you just can't really do anymore, right? You have to be open as a leader.
You have to be. And if you aren't, you probably aren't going to nurture the kind of brand that high performing talent of the future is going to want to be associated with. So we cannot discount or disconnect the leadership stance, the vulnerability, the trust built by a brand to the kind of environment that talent wants to be associated with. Like, those are connected. And we used to, in the old days, back when I started my career, they often talked about, you know, people trying to create this employee-employer contract, and how important that was. You know, that was that old language. Today, you have to you have to demonstrate it. You have to act those behaviors every single day. And young people watch everything that you do.
That's
And
awesome.
if it's not, if it's incongruent, they call it and name it. And so that's where that authenticity comes in that we talked about earlier. Being authentic, being willing to say, you know what, I didn't get that one right. I made a mistake with that.
Yes.
That people want to know that leaders, people that are senior, make mistakes. It's the same way that people talk about parenting. Like, let your kids know that you didn't do everything perfectly, so that they don't think that they have to suffer from the perfectionist monster either.
Wow, that's a very important thing to say.
It really is
true.
It is. And so I agree with you. I think that it is really important for us to model what we say we want to be, and what we say is important for the brands that we represent and for who we are as individuals. Because people want to bring individuality to the workplace, and they don't want to have to leave that at the door when they come into the places of work. And so we have to nurture and honor that, I believe.
Oh, I agree with you. And I think work in general, especially in a services-based business, is building relationships and growing and being around other humans. So it seems to be from the leader, from the employer to the employee. And I think both can learn from each other. And I definitely think a leader's job is to be a role model. And that's admitting mistakes, and that's even screwing up, and it's okay, right? So,
that's right. That's exactly right.
I think that's so important. So important. So I have about 3 questions left. So one question is, for those that are listening in or watching the podcast that want to learn about either ways that they can help you raise the bar in their community around the multicultural efforts for the NHL, are there any, I don't know, sites, microsites, paid web pages, or ways that they can get in touch with the NHL? Let's say that they want to, because I know in my community we do street hockey. So ways that they can get in touch or programs that they can get involved with.
Yes. So we are about to launch a new effort called NHL Unites. And it is a way for us to pull together every aspect of what unites us in a major microsite with programming and curation year round, so that people can communicate with us, they can see what's going on, and it doesn't get lost in the broader NHL.com, player stats and all that stuff. So that launch is going to happen at the beginning of the season in October, and I would ask people to watch for NHL Unites. We will have our own YouTube channel. We will have our own website. You'll be able to connect to it through NHL.com. It is going to be so exciting. And what it's going to do is to let people see that secret sauce that makes the avid fans fall in love with the sport, and they can see that the sport is welcoming for everyone. So we are really excited about it. It's something that we've been curating. I actually thought about this architecture when I was a consultant, and it was a fine wine before its time, and now it is fine.
Right, I understand.
So it is ready. So
good for you.
That is one of the ways. I'm also very active on LinkedIn, and I'm always open to people giving me both positive and constructive feedback about the ways in which we can engage. And I do respond to people on LinkedIn, as you well know. Yes. So I'm happy to be that funnel into any parts of our organization, and I can put people in contact with people who it may not be my area, but I can make those connections. In the local markets, our Learn to Play and Learn to Skate programs, all of the social impact work that we do, the NHL foundations. We have a big foundation in both in the US and in Canada that we just relaunched in the last year. So we have to continue to do a better job of showcasing to people all of the great work that we are doing, and for them to know that this is not new to the NHL, that we have just not promoted ourselves in the ways that maybe other sports do, and we are excited about doing that.
Okay, that's fantastic. I lied. I have two. I now have one additional question before I get to the last two. Well, you
Okay.
answered the last one, so there's really two. that are-
Okay.
So question more on the hockey level is obviously my my teams, my fans in hockey want to understand what does this look like at the farm level, you know, and what does this look like at the college, high school level? In you know,
Yes.
bringing in, hello, we're looking for more players that are multicultural, or you know,
Yes.
attracting more women into the PWHL. So can you talk about those things a little bit?
Yes. Yes. I'm going to send you a little sizzle reel that we put together at the end of the season, and maybe you would be willing to put it on your for your viewers.
Absolutely.
But it showcases how the pipeline for players has extended and is opening up like at amazing levels. This year's draft was the most diverse group of draftees in the history of the NHL.
Oh.
And this piece that I'm going to send you showcases that that diversity. It is amazing to see how the pipeline is building from the youth level, from U9 all the way up. We're seeing more kids go to college who play hockey. NCAA hockey is increasing like crazy.
Yep.
Last year, there were 13 women of color who were captains of Div 1 hockey programs. That is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And so again, these are the things that we are curating under NHL Unite, so that people see all of that information in one place. Another great example, the first ever hockey program at a historically Black college launched this year, Tennessee State University.
Oh, wow. Really?
In large part because of the partnership with the Nashville Predators, we were able to build that.
I love the Predators, I gotta say.
Another amazing
I love that club
team.
For all the same reasons as, you know, Vegas. Very
Yes,
similar. Right.
that's exactly right. And so, you know, with the PW finally emerging and us having one professional women's league, we now have a place for all of that female talent that we've been building through all of our female programs to now go into the professional ranks. So you're going to see that happen. Like in the next 5 years, women's hockey is going to explode, and we are excited to be partners with them on that. And we use all of our resources. We support all of their government relations out of my team so that they can take advantage of everything that we have already, so they don't have to build that muscle. And so this is just an exciting time in the sport of hockey. Again, youth, multicultural, female, tech savvy, purpose driven. Those are the 5 attributes that are going to really define the future of our sport and sports in general. And we are poised, unlike any other major sport, to capitalize on that. We are in a really fantastic place to take it and really accelerate like we've never done before. Yeah.
Well, it's really exciting. It'll be exciting to see the PWHL grow, and also it'll be exciting to see how the fan engagement is, and how the communities develop. Because what's exciting to me from the outside is also, as we talked about with the Sharks a little bit, how the communities are embracing in all these kind of like newer markets, non-traditional markets.
That's right.
You know, to me, it's like, as a hockey fan, I'm like, oh, I get to go to a new city, and it's really exciting.
That's right. That's exactly right. And, you know, with our latest edition in Utah and Salt Lake City, a tremendous
That's right.
excitement there. Utah Hockey Club will launch at the beginning of the season. So, there's excitement all over North America, as well as our international efforts, both in terms of infrastructure being built internationally, but also connecting the diasporas of places where they play hockey, like in the Middle East and in Africa and in South
I was
America.
actually thinking of Dubai.
Yeah. And there's amazing hockey going on around that connects to the diaspora of fans that are in North America, that when they see that and they see us recognizing and connecting into that representation, it just enhances our ability to create even stronger avid fandom and casual fandom here in the North America market.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And it's great to see the league growing, in so many aspects where it just hasn't before. So I'm glad you're on board, really. And I'm glad Gary, I wouldn't say took a risk, but he was smart and innovative. I met him a couple of times. I don't really know him, to do that, to say, hey, you know what? This makes sense. We need to innovate and grow it in this way. So last question.
Yes.
I asked all my guests this. When I asked you to be on Warrior Women in Business and share the character with you in the name, what did you think of the term Warrior Women in Business?
Oh, I just loved it. And it was the thing that attracted me to want to have this conversation with you, because I do think that the idea of being a warrior is really about those attributes that we talked about: the resiliency, the ability to be humble, the fearlessness, the service. These are all the things that warriors inhabit. And so I loved the visual. It made me feel empowered. It made me feel like it was a place and a space that represented me. And I wanted to have the conversation because I'm all about female empowerment. I think that when I started my career, there weren't that many women in business 45 years ago. And I didn't have a lot of role models. And I knew that I needed to create a space for helping to build that. There were so many of us on Wall Street at that time that came together across the industry and made it a place where women could feel welcome. And by the time the 90s came around, we saw women from business schools coming in, and that wave of change just continued to accelerate across industries. And so I'm excited about women. I'm excited about Warrior Women. And I'm delighted to have had this opportunity to chat with you about it.
Well, I really appreciate it. Like I said, when I first looked at your LinkedIn profile, it just stood out to me. A lot of women, they want to help other women, but I haven't seen that they've really done it. And it's not easy, right? It's not easy.
Oh, it's not easy.
This Warrior Woman in Business is my second business. It's not easy. And I know it takes an army. It takes a community. It takes more than you. Right. I mean, it takes. So I was really excited to hear, that's why I asked you so many questions. I could ask you a million questions. But I really wanted to understand how women truly do support women, what that looks like, how we can help each other. That's why I asked you about, and we'll put in the show notes after this is edited for everyone, some of the resources, some of the, whys you mentioned,
yes,
some of these other organizations. But I'm really happy you gave us so many golden nuggets today that we can really use as we move forward. And the most incredible thing I think we talked about was that I love that you talked about that trust and the importance of leaders being the role models and being authentic, because I think that what my guess is that could really help this shift happen.
I think so. That vulnerability piece, I think, is, in the old days, they used to call them soft skills. I call them core skills. These are the skills that count. These are the skills that make or break your leadership stance. And there are a lot of people that are good technically, but they are not leaders. And we need leaders. We know that. We see that across the country, right? We need leaders. And so thank you for having a platform that is focused on warrior women, where women can find a safe space to have these authentic conversations and to listen to people that hopefully are being authentic and telling the truth about the things that are good and the things that are not so good that help make us better. So thank you for your role and your place in all of this.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I think to that end, I think the leader, I always say, you know, people say obviously my answers changed over the years, but now I just say, they say, well, what do you want to do with Warrior Women in Business or your business? And I always say, I just want to have impact, because I think that's what we're supposed to do.
That's it. It's
When
impact.
we stop and we look at it all, it seems like the job is to, if you're going to take this hard road as a leader, whatever that may mean for your organization, is to have that impact. And like you said, like with the interns, you talked about it and all the great things that you're doing, you're having impact. So
well, that's my desire and my hope and my drive. So there you have it.
Well, I love it. Before you go, I'm just going to mention a few things, but first of all, I want to really thank you, Kim, for being on. You've given us so much advice, information. I love the stories, and I'm truly excited, not only for where hockey is going, because I'm a hockey player, but there's a lot of people that listen to us don't even pick up a hockey stick.
Yeah.
But where women are going and where communities are going, and large organizations and employers like the NHL are supporting communities. Like it's the corporate coming in and doing what I think they're supposed to do. So that's
exactly right.
Kudos to you and Gary and the whole team over there. You know, that's fantastic. So a couple things I want to mention. My next guest coming up next Thursday, no one should miss this. As I mentioned up front, Warrior Women in Business, we support women in business, but we also do a lot for the arts and entertainment, because I am a musician and it's my second love, hockey and music. And so I have the interim CEO of the New York City Tourism Board. And so cool. And I'm really excited about what we're going to talk about in terms of what's happening. There's so much happening in tourism, where it used to be, where it's changing. To your point, multicultural population, how that is affecting tourism. How are they embracing that? How are they speaking the language? As I talked about earlier in the podcast, how are they supporting the falls of Broadway, the restaurants, post-COVID? I have a list of questions. But for all of us in New York, I think we're going to benefit by understanding and being aware of what's happening and how our city is supporting our everyday life. So that's coming up next week. And that's episode 63. We have events coming up. As those of you who are members of Warrior Women in Business, we do have events planned for Los Angeles. We're split between New York and Los Angeles. Mainly everything's been New York. I'm ready to go out west.
Yeah.
So that'll be coming up probably in 2025. We may be doing something with the PWHL. I've been talking to the folks in LA about that, to help to raise the salaries for women in sports. I'm a huge proponent of this. So there's a lot that I'm working on, my team's working on, and we're hiring at Warrior Women in Business also. Any of the girls that really want to become Warrior Women leaders, please reach out to us. WarriorWomenBusiness.com, check us out on social media. You know, I'm rapidly growing this organization, and we're looking for women that want to become leaders and want to help other women. So
fantastic.
So with that being said, I'm going to sign off the live stream from Warrior Women in Business, episode 62, with Senior Executive VP of Social Impact at the National Hockey League, Kim Davis. Thank you so much for being on today. And we look forward to all your information and the video that you mentioned. I'll be sharing that with the audience as well. So thanks, everybody, from Warrior Women in Business, Jasmine Sandler and Kim Davis.
I am a warrior woman, watch me fly. Put on your cape.